We are about to solve a fun third grade fraction problem, which is our second lesson involving sharing chocolate. This time we find out which group of kids gets more chocolate. Let's get started. Here we have two delicious candy bars that are the same size and the same shape. Let's read the question and find out what's going on with this chocolate. Mrs. Numbers partitioned a candy bar into 3 equal portions to share between 3 people. Mr. Math partitioned a candy bar into 4 equal portions to share between 4 people. In which group would you get more chocolate, Mrs. Numbers or Mr. Math's? Remember that in lesson number 1, we solved a problem very similar to this one. We had a teacher that shared the same kind of chocolate bar between 3 people, and we found that each person gets 1 piece of 3 total pieces. Remember that the number on top, the numerator of the fraction, names how many pieces each person gets. The number on the bottom, the denominator, tells the total number of pieces. It's looking like we're already partway there to solving this problem, since we already know if you're sharing candy bar between 3 people, each person gets 1/3. So just like last time, we can't use the lines that are already represented on the candy bars. The bars are partitioned into lots of pieces, but we would want to create 3 equal-sized pieces on one bar and 4 equal-sized pieces on the other. The smart thing to do, I think, is to blur these chocolate bars out and represent them with 2 brown rectangles. My favorite strategy for solving this type of problem in math, the kind where you are sharing or dividing or partitioning, is to draw a smiley face to help me remember just how many people are involved. It's easy to forget the details when you start problem solving, so it's important to find ways to help your brain keep track of it all. All right, Mrs. Numbers has 3 people sharing the chocolate, and Mr. Math has 4 people sharing the chocolate. You might already have a prediction forming in your mind right now about which group has the people who get the most chocolate to eat. If you close your eyes and imagine yourself in the position where you're going to share a single candy bar with either 2 other people or with 3 other people, it makes sense that the less people sharing means the more chocolate for each. But we don't solve math problems with jumping at the first answer that pops in our mind, right? We want to really make sure that we have the correct answer. How do we do that? If we draw lines in Mrs. Numbers chocolate to make 3 equal portions and in Mr. Math's to make 4 equal portions, we are on our way to figuring this out. We have the chocolate partitioned so that each person gets 1 piece of chocolate. In Mrs. Numbers group, there are 3 equal pieces for 3 people. In Mr. Math's group, there are 4 equal pieces for 4 people. The candy bars are the same size, but the numbers of people sharing each are different. And that means the size of the piece that a person gets is different depending on which group they're in. It's time to label the chocolate with a fraction to help us describe what's happening here. In Mrs. Numbers group, each person gets 1 piece, so we know it's going to be a 1 in the numerator. There are 3 total pieces in her group, so it's a 3 in the denominator. In Mr. Math's group, each person gets 1 piece as well, so it's also a number 1 in the numerator. But this time there are 4 pieces, so it's going to be a 4 in the denominator. There's a special name for fractions that have the number 1 in the numerator, or when there's a 1 on top. We call it a unit fraction. And I really like it when special things happen with numbers and when special numbers are happening in math. So I love when we have a special name for something, and unit fraction is a fun thing to say. Try it, unit fraction. I'm looking at our 2 models and I'm noticing that sharing with less people really does mean you get a little bit more. So we were right about that. Mrs. Numbers group gets a little bit more chocolate per person than Mr. Math's group. I don't know if we should really show the frowning face. Everyone is still pretty happy, right? They are getting some chocolate. It's just a little less for the people in Mr. Math's group. It's a little bit hard to tell the difference in size when the chocolate is side by side. It's easier to compare when they are lined up. Never be afraid to create models when you are problem solving to help you find the solutions. If it works better for you to draw a picture, no one is going to stop you. I always find that when I need to compare the size of pieces, having them above and below each other is the way to go. As we compare this piece in Mrs. Numbers candy bar, which represents 1/3, to this piece in Mr. Math's candy bar, which represents 1/4, we can see that the shading is overlapping just a little bit. That means Mrs. Numbers' piece is slightly bigger. In math, when we're talking about comparing numbers or comparing fractions, we don't mean that we're comparing which one is prettier or smarter or better. We are specifically comparing greater than, less than, or equal to. So get used to thinking about the word compare with those words and with the symbols that we use to make comparing faster. When you were younger, you may have used fun things to remember this, like the alligator has his mouth open to the number that is more. But in 3rd grade, we just say greater than with the symbol open towards the first number, or less than with the symbol open towards the second number. Of course, equal to is the equal sign, which we use when they are the same. Comparing fractions can feel tricky, but when we line up the pictures and actually compare the amount of chocolate, it becomes clear that even though the number 3 is less than the number 4, 1/3 is actually more chocolate than 1/4. That means 1/3 is greater than 1/4. So the alligator mouth is open to 1/3. Mrs. Numbers is sharing the bar between 3 people, and Mr. Math is sharing between 4 people. When we go back to the problem and look at the question, in which group would you get more chocolate, Mrs. Numbers or Mr. Math? We know that the answer is Mrs. Numbers is the group that is getting more chocolate. That's because the more people you are sharing with, the less each person gets, which means that 1/3 is greater than 1/4. So our answer is Mrs. Numbers group. You would get more chocolate in Mrs. Numbers group. You also know that if you really love chocolate, try to share with the least amount of people possible so that you get the most chocolate.